Instead of beginning with the title sequence and a message from Holly, the episode begins with a dance routine performed by Lister, Rimmer and the Cat. The trio are dancing along to a song called Tongue Tied, and it's sung primarily by the Cats. The dance choreography is fantastic and was choreographed by Charles Organs, who played Queeg in the previous episode. The opening dance sequence is fantastic, it's funny and downright absurd. It's a brilliant way to start the episode and would have taken viewers by surprise in 1988. It's great that, for the series finale, the writers decided to do something a little bit different. It cuts to Red Dwarf, where it transpires that the whole sequence was actually a dream that the cat had, and the cat was looking through the dream recorder to find a different dream. It's interesting that Danny John Jules is so prominent in these opening few minutes, when in the grand scheme of the episode, he isn't. His performance is fantastic, particularly during the tongue-tied sequence. The conversation between Rimmer and Lister is pretty great, and centres around Rimmer's attitude towards women. This scene is what we'd come to expect from a scene where Lister and Rimmer have a heated discussion. It's sharp and witty writing that just fits the two characters perfectly. Holly then appears and announces that he has invented the Holly Hop Drive, which can take the crew immediately to Earth. But instead of sending them to Earth, the Holly Hop Drive fails and takes them to a parallel universe, where everything appears to be the opposite. The crew enter the parallel version of Red Dwarf and soon meet their parallel versions. The parallel counterparts are pretty well cast and well written. There are a lot of good observational jokes about society and gender differences. This episode actually seems quite relevant in this day and age. The character traits of Lister and Rimmer are made obvious and even pointed out in some almost fourth wall breaking moments. Now, the parallel versions of the trio are pretty great, as I've said. However, the best counterpart has to be the Cats. Instead of having a female counterpart, the Cat's equivalent from the other universe is a character called the Dog. It's a great way of subverting expectations, and in this case to create an effective joke. The Dog is only in a few scenes, but it is well written and works as a fantastic contrast to the clean and vain Cat. When the Cat first meets the Dog, it's hilarious. It's down to the performances and the writing. The timing is pretty great, and this is probably one of the best scenes in the episode. The scene with the two Rimmers during the disco is just delightfully awkward and uncomfortable. What this episode does well is observational humour with its characters. Rimmer, the male one, has had limited experiences with women, so is useless with them, and this is then flipped to the other side with the female Rimmer. Given how neither of them knows how to behave in the company of the opposite sex, it does make for a scene filled with awkward social type jokes. This episode's biggest problem is that it just isn't very plot heavy. There isn't really much of a story. Once the crew end up on the parallel version of Red Dwarf, there's just a lot of talking and good jokes, sure, but not much in the way of a good story. Now, of course, the last 10 minutes or so do change that, but for the most part, this episode just feels lacking somewhat. Does this episode downright suck because of this? Well, no. It's just a problem that could have easily been avoided. The jokes are all well and good, but what would have been better would have been if they were integrated into an actual story. Arguably little to talk about. Once the two Red Dwarf crews have met and become acquainted and jokes are made, etc., the story sort of stagnates until the final 10 minutes or so. If this review ends up being quite short, you'll know why. The next big thing to happen in the story is when it transpires that the Lister from our universe is pregnant, having slept with the female Lister. It's not a bad twist in the tale, in fact it's quite good and includes more observational humour. The crew heads back to their universe and realise that the two babies that Lister was holding when they experienced the future echoes were his yet-to-be-born twins. One of the better aspects of this twist is how it links back to Future Echoes, the second episode of Series 1. Whether the writers had this twist in mind all the way back then, possibly. Series 2 was commissioned at the same time as Series 1, which is why it aired less than 6 months later. So it is possible that when writing Future Echoes this twist was in mind. So that concludes Parallel Universe. A pretty good episode, but not without its issues, as mentioned. It's one of the weaker episodes of Series 2, but it is still thoroughly enjoyable, which says a lot about the overall quality of Series 2. That also concludes Series 2, which works effectively as a sequel to Series 1. It builds on stuff established before and introduces new elements. Series 2 is better than Series 1, it feels less restricted to the ships, the jokes are better, as are the stories. Series 3 would not air until November 1989, over a year later, a series which brought about a huge set of changes, but that will be discussed in a future video.